The wind howled through the cracks in the wooden chapel walls, carrying with it the bitter cold of a Wyoming winter. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the small settlement of Willow Creek in white silence. It was February 1887, and inside the modest church, a wedding was taking place. Jed Brangan stood at the altar, his massive frame dwarfing everything around him. At 6 feet and 8 inches tall, with shoulders broad as a barn door, he cut an imposing figure even in his simple black suit, the only one he owned, borrowed from the general store and altered hastily by Mrs. Henderson to accommodate his unusual size. His hands, calloused from years of breaking horses and working cattle, fidgeted with the brim of his hat until the preacher gently reminded him to set it aside. Across from him stood Eliza May Turner, barely reaching his chest even in her Sunday boots. She wore a gray wool dress, practical and warm, with small pearl buttons her late mother had sewn on years ago. No white gown for her. This was her second wedding. And white was for first-time brides with untouched hopes. Her auburn hair was pinned up properly, though a few stubborn strands had already escaped to frame her pale face. She was 23, though her green eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived longer. The congregation was small, just 8 souls brave enough to venture out in the storm. There was Doc Holbrook and his wife Sarah, the Hendersons from the general store, old Martha Wilson, who served as the town's midwife, and Tom Garrett, Jed's partner at the ranch. They huddled in the front pews, their breath visible in the cold air despite the wood stove crackling in the corner. Reverend Phillips, a thin man with kind eyes, opened his worn Bible. "Dearly beloved, we gather here on this fierce winter day to witness the union of Jed and Eliza." Eliza's mind wandered as the familiar words washed over her. Just 18 months ago, she'd stood in a different church in Kansas, marrying William Turner with a heart full of dreams. Those dreams had died with him in a farming accident, along with the baby she'd carried for 7 months. The doctor said it was the shock that caused her to lose the child. She'd buried them both on the same gray October day and sworn she'd never risk her heart again. Yet here she was. She'd met Jed at the autumn harvest dance, though met was perhaps too gentle a word. He'd accidentally knocked over an entire table of pies trying to navigate the crowded barn, his massive frame simply too large for the space. While other women tittered behind their hands, Eliza had grabbed a cloth and helped him clean up the mess, joking that at least the dogs would feast well that night. He'd laughed, a deep, rumbling sound like distant thunder, and she'd found herself smiling for the first time in months. "The rings?" Reverend Phillips prompted. Tom stepped forward, producing 2 simple gold bands from his vest pocket. Jed took the smaller one, his huge fingers surprisingly gentle as he slipped it onto Eliza's hand. "Now, Jed, speak your vows." This was the moment Eliza had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Jed had insisted on writing his own vows, refusing to use the traditional words. In the 3 months of their courtship, she'd learned he was a man who said what he meant, no more and no less. Jed cleared his throat, his deep voice filling the small chapel. "Eliza May, I ain't much for pretty words, but I promise you this, I'll work every day to give you a good life. This land is hard, but I'm harder. I've got 160 acres of prime grazing land, a solid house with a good roof, and plans for more." He paused, his dark eyes intense as they met hers. "In the next 13 winters, you'll give me 10 sons, strong boys to work the land, to build something that lasts, and I'll give you my strength, my protection, and my name. This I swear before God and these witnesses." A collective gasp rippled through the small congregation. Sarah Holbrook's hand flew to her mouth. Even Reverend Phillips looked momentarily stunned. 10 sons in 13 years? It was an audacious promise. Some might say impossible. Others might call it presumptuous. But Eliza understood. This wasn't a command or a boast. She'd learned to read the truth beneath Jed's rough words. This was his way of promising her a future, of telling her he believed in tomorrow when she'd lost faith in it. 10 sons meant 10 reasons to keep living, 10 anchors to hold her to this world when grief tried to pull her under. It meant he saw her not as the broken widow she believed herself to be, but as someone strong enough to build a dynasty with him. "Eliza?" the Reverend prompted gently. "Your vows?" She looked up at Jed, really looked at him, past the intimidating size to the man beneath. His face was weathered by 35 years of sun and wind, marked by a thin scar along his jaw from a cattle drive gone wrong. But his eyes were kind, patient. He'd waited 3 months for her answer to his proposal, never pushing, just showing up each Sunday to help with whatever needed doing around her small rental cottage. "Jedediah Brangan," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I come to you not as a fresh young bride, but as a woman who knows that life can be cruel. I've buried a husband and a child, and I swore I'd never risk such pain again." She felt him tense slightly, but continued. "But you've shown me that hiding from life is just another kind of death. So I promise you this. I'll match your strength with my own. I'll make your house a home. I'll stand beside you through drought and plenty, through blizzards and summer heat. And yes," she added, a small smile touching her lips, "I'll give you sons, as many as the Lord sees fit to bless us with. This I swear." Jed's face transformed with his smile, the harsh lines softening into something almost boyish. He squeezed her hands gently, mindful of his strength. "Then by the power vested in me by God in the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jed, you may kiss your bride." Jed bent down, far down, and kissed her softly, briefly aware of their audience. But in that moment, Eliza felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Not the naive hope of her first marriage, but something harder and more durable, forged in loss and tempered by determination. As they turned to face their witnesses, the chapel door burst open. Snow swirled in, along with young Billy Henderson, his face red with cold and excitement. "Mr. Brangan, sir, one of your mares, she's foaling. Tom said to tell you the baby's turned wrong." The wedding party looked at Jed expectantly. It was his wedding day, after all. But Eliza knew ranch life didn't pause for ceremonies. She touched his arm. "Go. I'll gather our things and meet you at home." He looked down at her, uncertain. "But the wedding dinner will taste just as good warmed over," she said firmly. "That mare and foal are our future, too. Go." Relief and admiration flickered across his features. He grabbed his hat and coat, then paused. "Tom, see my wife gets home safe." The word wife seemed to please him, for he repeated it. "My wife." Then he was gone, his long strides carrying him out into the storm. The congregation stood in slightly awkward silence until Martha Wilson chuckled. "Well, that's ranch life for you. Come on, everyone. Let's get this food over to the Brangan place before it freezes solid." An hour later, Eliza stood in the doorway of her new home, surveying the main room. It was larger than she'd expected, built sturdy with thick log walls and a massive stone fireplace. The furniture was sparse but well made, a heavy oak table, 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire. Everything spoke of a bachelor's life, functional but lacking warmth. "It needs work," she murmured to herself, already envisioning curtains at the windows, rag rugs on the floor, herbs hanging from the rafters. Sarah Holbrook, helping unpack Eliza's few belongings, patted her shoulder. "All homes do, dear, but it's got good bones." She paused, then added carefully, "That was quite a vow Jed made. 10 sons." "I know what people must think," Eliza said quietly. "That it's too much, too bold, maybe impossible." "Or maybe," Martha Wilson interjected, setting down a basket of preserves. "It's exactly the kind of impossible promise that makes life worth living. I've delivered hundreds of babies in my time, and I'll tell you this. The women who thrive out here are the ones who dare to dream big, even when it seems foolish." Through the window, Eliza could see the barn, lamplight glowing through the cracks. Jed would be there with the mare, his huge hands gentle as he worked to save both mother and foal. "In 13 winters," he'd said. 10 sons. She placed a hand on her flat stomach, wondering if perhaps their first might already be growing within her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt that strange new hope spreading warm through her chest. "Well then," she said, turning back to the women with a determined smile, "I'd better make this a home worthy of 10 sons." Outside, the Wyoming wind continued to howl, but inside the Brangan house, the fire crackled warm and bright, and the future, impossible as it might seem, had already begun. The March winds rattled the shutters, sending icy fingers through every gap in the walls. Eliza woke before dawn, as had become her habit, to find Jed's side of the bed empty but still warm. Through the frosted window, she could see his massive silhouette moving between the barn and the woodshed, already deep into the morning chores. 3 weeks of marriage had taught her the rhythm of ranch life. Up before the sun. Breakfast on the table as the first light touched the mountains. Then a day that stretched endless with tasks that couldn't wait. She pulled on her heaviest wool dress and wrapped her shawl tight before heading to the kitchen. The water in the bucket by the door had a thin layer of ice. She broke it with the ladle and set water to boil, her movements efficient despite the cold stiffness in her fingers. Biscuits from last night's supper would do, warmed in the oven with fresh gravy. Coffee, black and strong the way Jed liked it. Salt pork fried crisp with potatoes. She was plating the food when he came in, bringing a blast of winter air and the smell of hay and horses. Snow dusted his dark hair and shoulders. "Smells good," he said, hanging his coat on the peg. His hands, when he washed them in the basin, were red with cold. They ate in companionable silence, a habit she appreciated. Her first husband had needed constant chatter, but Jed seemed to understand that mourning required fortification, not conversation. "We lost 2 calves in the night," he said finally, pushing back his empty plate. "Found them frozen in the far pasture. Mothers must have dropped them early and couldn't keep them warm enough." The loss sat heavy between them. 2 calves meant 2 less head to sell come fall. Money they'd counted on for supplies and improvements. "I'll help you bring the mothers in," Eliza offered. "They'll need watching if they're calving early." He studied her, that careful way he had, as if measuring her words against some internal scale. "You know cattle?" "I know enough." She'd learned plenty on the farm in Kansas, though William had preferred she stay in the house. "And I can't keep this place running if I'm afraid of a little cold." A slight smile touched his weathered face. "Bundle up good then. That wind's got teeth." The work was brutal. They spent the morning herding the pregnant cows closer to the barn, fighting through knee-deep snowdrifts. Eliza's skirts, even kilted up for riding, grew heavy with ice. Her fingers went numb inside her mittens. But she kept pace with Jed, helping drive the stubborn animals through the gate. By noon, they had the expecting mothers in the near pasture where they could be watched. Eliza's face felt raw, her lungs burning from the cold air. But there was satisfaction in it too, in doing necessary work alongside her husband instead of simply keeping his house. "You did good," Jed said as they trudged back. From him, she'd learned, this was high praise. That evening, as she served supper, her monthly bleeding failed to come. She said nothing, not wanting to raise hopes or fears too soon. But as she cleared the dishes, she found herself thinking of the promise. 10 suns in 13 winters. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her belly. The howl that woke them 3 nights later was like nothing she'd ever heard. Long, mournful, and far too close. Eliza sat up, heart hammering, to find Jed already out of bed and reaching for his rifle. "Wolves," he said grimly. "Stay inside." But even as he spoke, they heard the cattle's panicked lowing, the crash of hooves against fence rails. Jed cursed, yanking on his boots and coat. "They're after the calves." He was out the door before she could respond. Through the window, she watched his dark figure sprint toward the barn, saw other shadows moving in the moonlight, lean, hungry shapes circling the herd. The rifle cracked once, twice. The shadows scattered but didn't flee. She could hear them calling to each other, an eerie chorus that raised every hair on her neck. These weren't the cautious coyotes she'd known in Kansas. These were timber wolves, made bold by winter's hunger. Another shot, then Jed's voice shouting. Without thinking, Eliza grabbed the second rifle from above the door, the one he'd shown her how to use their first week. She pulled on her boots and coat over her nightgown. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. But she could see Jed by the fence, trying to reload while keeping himself between the wolves and a bawling calf tangled in the rails. 3 wolves circled him, patient as death. Eliza raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel as he'd taught her. Her hands shook from cold, from fear, from the weight of the gun. She squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was enough. The wolves wheeled toward this new threat, giving Jed time to free the calf and push it toward safety. He fired again, this time hitting one of the wolves. It yelped and limped away, the others following into the darkness. "I told you to stay inside." Jed's voice was rough with fear and anger as he reached her. "And let them take you along with the calves." She was shaking now, reaction setting in. "I'm your wife, not your house pet." For a moment, his face was hard as granite. Then something shifted. "You could have been killed. So could you." They stood there in the freezing night, breath clouding between them. Finally, he reached out and pulled her against him, his huge frame sheltering her from the wind. "Stubborn woman," he muttered into her hair. "Stubborn man," she replied, feeling his heart race against her cheek. They spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch. But the wolves didn't return. By morning, they found tracks everywhere. The pack had been larger than they'd thought, maybe 8 or 10 animals. One dead calf lay in the far corner of the pasture, but it could have been worse, much worse. "We'll need to organize a hunt," Jed said, studying the tracks. "Can't have a pack that size so close to the settlements. I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to the other ranchers." But tomorrow brought new problems. Eliza woke feeling queasy, her stomach rolling at the smell of coffee. She made it to the porch before losing what little she'd eaten. When she straightened, wiping her mouth, she found Jed watching from the doorway. "You sick?" She almost laughed at the worry in his voice. This giant who'd faced down wolves looked genuinely alarmed by the prospect of illness. "Not sick," she said carefully. "At least, not the way you mean." Understanding dawned slowly on his face. We're, maybe, probably." She touched her still flat stomach. It's early yet. Anything could happen. But Jed was already crossing to her, his hands framing her face with impossible gentleness. "Our first son," he said with such certainty she almost believed it. "It could be a daughter," she warned. He shook his head. "I promised you 10 sons. It'll be a son." The weeks that followed tested that certainty. Eliza's sickness worsened, leaving her weak and dizzy. The smell of meat sent her running for the door. Some days she could barely keep water down. Martha Wilson came to check on her, brewing ginger tea and clucking her tongue. "See, some women carry hard," the midwife said. "Doesn't mean anything's wrong, but you need to rest more. Eat what you can." Rest was a luxury the ranch couldn't afford. The wolf pack, emboldened by hunger, struck at other homesteads. Tom Garrett lost 6 sheep. The Hendersons found their dog torn apart just yards from their door. The men organized hunting parties, spending days tracking the pack through the mountains. Eliza did what she could, fighting through the sickness to keep the household running. But one gray afternoon, as she hauled water from the well, pain lanced through her middle. She dropped the bucket, doubling over as cramps seized her. "No," she gasped, recognizing the feeling from before. "Please, no." She made it inside before the bleeding started. Alone in the house, she cleaned herself as best she could, changed her undergarments, and lay on the bed, willing her body to hold on to the tiny life within. When Jed came home hours later, he found her there, pale and shaking. "What's wrong?" He was beside her instantly, his cold hands checking her forehead. "Cramping," she managed, and some blood, but it's stopped now. Maybe." His face went still. Without a word, he shrugged out of his coat and lay down beside her, pulling her carefully against him. "You stay right here," he ordered. "Don't move unless the house is on fire. The cattle can wait. You don't move." For 3 days, she barely left the bed. Jed brought her meals, helped her to the privy, did all the chores himself despite the mounting work. Tom came to help when he could. Sarah Holbrook brought soup, and somehow, miraculously, the cramping eased. The bleeding stopped. "Tough as your mama," Jed murmured one night, his huge hand splayed carefully over her belly. "That's my boy." But Eliza lay awake, remembering another baby who hadn't been tough enough, wondering if she had the strength to do this 9 more times. The wind howled outside, winter refusing to release its grip, and she pressed closer to her husband's warmth. In the morning, she would get up, face the work and the worry. She would help him build this life he'd promised her, populate it with the sons he'd sworn to give her. But for now, she let herself rest in his arms, their first child still clinging to life within her, while outside the Wyoming winter raged on. The storm came without warning on the last day of May. Eliza had spent the morning in the garden, coaxing life from the soil despite her swollen belly. 8 months along now. She moved carefully between the rows of seedlings, her back aching but her spirits high. The vegetables would supplement their meat-heavy diet, and she'd even managed to start some flowers, hardy marigolds and sweet peas that reminded her of her mother's garden. The first fat raindrops caught her reaching for the last of the washing on the line. Within minutes, the drops became a deluge. Thunder cracked overhead as she struggled with the wet sheets, her movements clumsy with the weight she carried. "Get inside!" Jed appeared from nowhere, taking the laundry basket from her hands. Together they ran for the house as hail began to fall, stones the size of marbles bouncing off the ground. Safe inside. Eliza pressed a hand to her side where the baby kicked vigorously. "He doesn't like storms," she said, trying to make light of the sudden violence outside. Jed wasn't listening. He stood at the window, watching his newly planted cornfield disappear under white ice. 20 acres, beaten flat in minutes, their winter feed gone. That night, her pains started. Not the practice cramps she'd grown used to, but real labor, waves that took her breath and left her gasping. Too early, she thought desperately. The baby wasn't due for another month. Martha, she managed between contractions. Get Martha! Jed's face went white. The storm still raged, turning the roads to mud. It was 8 miles to town, 8 miles back. But he didn't hesitate, pulling on his slicker and heading for the barn. Tom, Eliza called after him. Stop at Tom's first. Don't go alone. The hours that followed blurred together. Pain and wind and the endless drumming of rain on the roof. Eliza walked when she could, gripped the bedpost when she couldn't. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. She was on her knees beside the bed when the door burst open. Not Jed with Martha, but Sarah Holbrook, soaked through and gasping. Doc saw Jed ride past, she explained, pulling off her wet cloak. Figured you might need help before Martha could get here. I've birthed 5 of my own. I can... She stopped, seeing Eliza's position. Lord have mercy. How far along? I can feel him, Eliza gasped. He's coming now. Sarah didn't waste time on shock. She helped Eliza onto the bed, grabbed clean linens, heated water. Between contractions, she talked steadily, calmly, about her own children, about the storm, about anything except the fact that the baby was coming too fast, too early. The door slammed open again, Martha Wilson looking like she'd swum the 8 miles rather than ridden. Behind her, Jed filled the doorway, water streaming from his hat. Out, Martha commanded, already rolling up her sleeves. This is women's work. But Eliza reached for him. Stay, she whispered. Please. Martha looked ready to argue, but something in Eliza's face stopped her. Fine. But stay by her head and do as you're told. What followed was the longest hour of Eliza's life. The pain was different from her first pregnancy, sharper, more urgent. The baby was coming fast, too fast. She gripped Jed's huge hands, feeling bones grind, but he never flinched. A push now, Martha ordered, hard as you can. Eliza bore down, a scream tearing from her throat. Lightning flashed, thunder shook the house, and Samuel Jedediah Brangan entered the world in a rush of blood and water, his first cry lost in the storm's fury. Small, Martha muttered, working quickly to clear his airways. But breathing, that's what matters. She placed the baby on Eliza's chest, and the world narrowed to this, her son's tiny weight, his perfect fingers, the way he immediately turned toward her breast. He was small. Yes, but his cry grew stronger by the minute. Samuel, Jed said softly, one massive finger stroking the baby's damp head. Strong as the prophet. The storm broke near dawn, leaving the world washed clean. Eliza dozed fitfully, waking each time to check that Samuel still breathed. He was so small in the cradle Jed had built, the blankets seeming to swallow him whole. He needs to eat more, Martha said on her 3rd visit. Every 2 hours, even if you have to wake him. Small babies. She didn't finish, but Eliza heard the warning. Those first weeks were a battle. Samuel struggled to nurse, falling asleep after just a few minutes. Eliza tried everything, cool cloths to keep him awake, switching sides constantly, even expressing milk into a spoon to drip into his mouth. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began to gain. Jed threw himself into the farm work with desperate energy. The hail had destroyed more than just the corn. Half the garden was gone, and several calves had been injured in their panic. He worked from dawn to well past dusk, replanting what he could, doctoring animals, trying to salvage something from the disaster. We'll make it through, he said one evening, collapsing into his chair. Samuel lay on his chest, finally content after a good feeding. Might have to sell some cattle earlier than planned, but we'll make it. Eliza didn't mention the bills she'd been tallying, the doctor's visits, the extra supplies for the baby, the seed they'd need to replant. Instead, she focused on the miracle of their son's steady breathing, the way his fingers curled around Jed's thumb. By July, Samuel had turned a corner. His cheeks filled out, his cry grew robust. He watched everything with dark eyes that already showed his father's intensity. Eliza carried him everywhere in a sling Sarah had showed her how to make, keeping him close while she worked. The ranch demanded constant attention. With the crop loss, every calf, every garden vegetable became precious. Eliza learned to do more with less, stretching meals with wild greens and rabbit, patching clothes until patches covered patches. She milked the 2 dairy cows, churned butter to trade in town, gathered eggs to sell to the hotel. "You're working too hard," Jed said one evening, finding her asleep in the rocking chair with Samuel at her breast and a basket of mending at her feet. "No harder than you," she countered, noting the new lines around his eyes, the way he favored his left shoulder where a spooked horse had kicked him. August brought a letter that changed everything. Jed's expression darkened as he read, his jaw working the way it did when he was trying not to curse. "What is it?" He handed her the paper. Official letterhead, fancy script. But the meaning was clear. The bank was calling in part of their loan early. The crop loss had been reported. Their ability to pay questioned. They had 60 days to come up with $200 or face foreclosure proceedings. $200, Eliza breathed. It might as well have been 2,000. "I'll sell the breeding stock," Jed said flatly. "Both bulls should bring enough. But the herd, without good bulls, will have nothing without the land." His voice was harsh with suppressed emotion. Those bulls were his pride, carefully chosen, the foundation of the ranch's future. That night, as Samuel slept between them, they lay awake planning. Every possible economy, every asset they could spare. The numbers never quite added up. "We could ask my cousin in Chicago," Eliza suggested quietly. "He offered help when William died." Jed's whole body stiffened. "I provide for my family." "And you do, but sometimes—" "No." The word was final. "I'll find another way." The other way came from an unexpected source. Tom Garrett appeared one morning with a proposition. The Army fort 2 days' ride north needed horses, specifically, needed someone who could break and train wild mustangs for cavalry use. "Dangerous work," Tom admitted, "but they're paying well. $20 a head for Greenbroke mounts, 30 for fully trained. Split it even between us?" Jed looked at Eliza, who was trying to keep her face neutral despite the fear clawing at her chest. Breaking wild horses was brutal work in the best circumstances. One wrong move, one moment's inattention. "I'll help," she heard herself say. Both men turned to stare. "Not the breaking," she added quickly, "but the gentling after. I'm good with horses, and gently handled mounts will bring the full 30. They worked out a system. Jed and Tom would capture and do the rough breaking at a makeshift corral in the foothills. Then Eliza would work with each horse at the home ranch, teaching them to accept saddle and rider without fear. All while caring for Samuel, keeping house, and maintaining the garden and livestock. September flew by in a blur of work. Eliza's days started before dawn, nursing Samuel, then out to the corrals where the half-wild horses waited. She had a gift for it, Jed admitted, a patience and gentle persistence that won over even the most skittish animals. Samuel thrived despite the chaos. She carried him to the corrals, setting his basket in the shade where he could watch. He rarely cried, seeming content to observe the horses with his serious dark eyes. Sometimes she talked to him as she worked, explaining each step, and he would coo back as if offering advice. By October, they'd delivered 15 horses to the fort. The payment, combined with the sale of one bull and every spare thing they could part with, met the bank's demand with $12 to spare. The night they paid off the note, Jed brought out a small bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. "To my wife," he said, raising his glass, "who can gentle wild horses and raise babies and keep a man from foolishness." Eliza touched her glass to his, then gasped as Samuel chose that moment to roll over for the first time, tangling himself in his blanket with an indignant squawk. "And to our son," she added, rescuing the baby and settling him on her hip. "The first of 10. Jed's weathered face softened as he watched them. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, but inside the little house was warm with lamplight and laughter. They'd survived the storms, literal and financial. Samuel was healthy and growing. The ranch was safe for now. As Eliza nursed the baby before bed, she allowed herself to imagine the future Jed had promised. This house full of boys, the land prospering, a legacy built from love and sheer determination. One son down, 9 to go. It seemed impossible. But then, so had surviving these first months. Samuel released her breast with a contented sigh, milk-drunk and peaceful. She traced his perfect features with one finger, marveling at the fierce love that filled her. Whatever came next, they would face it together, all 3 of them. "One down," she whispered to the sleeping baby. 9 to go. The autumn of 1890 painted the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and rust. 3-year-old Samuel raced through the tall grass, his sturdy legs pumping as he chased a butterfly. From the porch, Eliza watched while rocking 2-year-old Jacob, her 3rd pregnancy just beginning to show beneath her apron. "Mama, catch it," Samuel called, his father's determination already evident in the set of his small jaw. "Butterflies aren't meant to be caught, sweet one," she called back. "Just enjoyed." Inside the house, improvements showed their growing prosperity. New glass windows replaced the oiled paper, a proper cook stove dominated the kitchen, and a second room had been added for the children. The horse contracts with the fort had continued, bringing steady income that allowed for small luxuries and necessary expansions. Jacob squirmed to get down, wanting to follow his older brother. Where Samuel was thoughtful and intense like Jed, Jacob was pure energy and mischief. With Eliza's auburn hair and quick smile, the boys were inseparable despite their different temperaments. "Let me help with that." Sarah Holbrook appeared around the corner, her own youngest on her hip. The women had grown closer over the years, sharing the trials of ranch motherhood. "Just visiting, or is there news?" Eliza asked, setting Jacob down to toddle after Samuel. Sarah's expression grew serious. "There's been trouble at the Morrison place. Cattle missing. Fences cut. Dan Morrison swears he saw riders 2 nights back, heading toward Devil's Canyon with a dozen head." Eliza's blood chilled. Cattle rustling had always been a threat, but lately it had grown worse. The territory's growth brought prosperity, but also those who would steal it. That evening, she relayed the news to Jed. His face darkened as he cleaned his rifle with methodical precision. "Morrison's the 3rd this month," he said. Peter Garrett lost 20 head. The Swensons found their prize bull shot dead in the pasture. Who would do such a thing? Men who'd rather steal than work. He set the rifle aside, pulling her close. "Don't worry. Tom and I have been talking to the other ranchers. We won't stand by and let thieves destroy what we've built." 2 nights later, Eliza woke to the sound of horses, many horses moving fast. She reached for Jed, but his side of the bed was empty. Through the window, she could see torches bobbing in the darkness near the barn. Heart pounding, she checked on the boys, both sleeping soundly, then grabbed the shotgun from beside the door. But as she peered out, she recognized Tom Garrett's voice, then Dan Morrison's, not raiders, neighbors. Jed emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. The men spoke in low, urgent tones. After a few minutes, he came to the house. "Rustlers hit the Hendersons," he said quietly. "Took 30 head and shot their dog. We're going after them." "Now in the dark?" "Trail's fresh. By morning they'll be scattered to the wind." He pulled on his heavy coat, checking his ammunition. "Bar the door. Anyone comes who isn't me or Tom. You shoot first and ask questions later." She wanted to beg him to stay, but knew he was right. If the rustlers weren't stopped, every ranch in the valley was at risk. Instead, she gripped his hand briefly. "Come back safe. Always do." But dawn came with no sign of the men. Eliza went through the motions of mourning, feeding the boys, milking the cows, gathering eggs, while her ears strained for hoofbeats. Jacob fussed, picking up on her tension, while Samuel asked repeatedly where Papa had gone. It was near noon when she spotted the dust cloud. She gathered the boys inside, shotgun ready, until she could make out Jed's distinctive form in the lead. Relief flooded through her as she counted. All the men who'd left were returning. They looked exhausted, covered in trail dust, but grimly satisfied. Jed swung down from his horse, accepting the water she brought. He found them holed up in Devil's Canyon, just like Morrison figured. He reported, had close to 100 head penned up, brands already altered on some. What happened? His expression was carefully neutral. What needed to happen? Those men won't trouble honest folk again. She didn't press for details. This was frontier justice, harsh but necessary. The law was too far away, too slow to protect isolated ranches. Communities protected themselves or perished. Within a week, the ranchers had formalized their alliance. The Willow Creek Cattlemen's Association, they called it, with elected officers and regular meetings. Jed was voted vice president, his level head and imposing presence making him a natural leader. "It's not just about protecting the cattle," he explained to Eliza as she mended his good shirt for the meetings. "It's about building something bigger than individual ranches. Together, we can negotiate better prices, share resources, help each other through hard times." The association's first major decision was to hire 2 full-time range riders to patrol the area. Young men, good with guns and horses, who would watch for trouble and drive off predators, both animal and human. The cost would be shared among all members, affordable when divided but impossible for any single ranch. Winter arrived early that year, November bringing heavy snows. Eliza, now heavily pregnant, found the cold harder to bear. Her back ached constantly and her ankles swelled despite Martha Wilson's herbal remedies. "Twins," Martha announced during a visit, her experienced hands palpating Eliza's enormous belly. "Sure as I'm sitting here, that's 2 heartbeats I'm hearing." Eliza stared at her in shock. "Twins? But how will I mean, with the boys already?" "Same as every mother since Eve," Martha said practically, "one day at a time, with help when you need it." Jed took the news with his usual calm acceptance, though Eliza caught him staring at her sometimes with something like awe. That evening, he started work on a second cradle. The twins announced themselves on a crystalline December morning. Eliza had risen to start breakfast when the first pain struck, sharp and sudden. By the time Jed returned from the barn, she was gripping the table edge, breathing hard. This labor was different from the others, faster, more intense. Martha arrived within the hour, bringing her daughter Rose to help. Sarah Holbrook took charge of Samuel and Jacob, distracting them with cookies and stories while their mother's cries echoed through the house. "The first one's coming," Martha announced. "You push now, Eliza, hard." Ezra arrived just after noon, squalling and red-faced. But there was no time to rest. Within minutes, the pains resumed. Caleb followed his brother into the world as the clock struck 1, smaller but just as loud. "2 boys," Martha said, placing them in Eliza's arms. "Healthy as can be, though this little one will need extra watching." Eliza studied her new sons through tears of exhaustion and joy. Ezra was slightly larger, with a thatch of dark hair like his father. Caleb was fair, almost bald, with delicate features that reminded her of her own father. "4 sons," she whispered to Jed when he was finally allowed in. "Nearly halfway to your promise." He kissed her forehead gently, his large hands cradling the twins with practiced ease. "You're amazing. You know that?" The winter that followed tested everyone's endurance. 2 infants meant double the work, constant feeding, changing, soothing. Samuel tried to help, fetching diapers and singing lullabies in his serious little voice. Jacob was less enthusiastic about the noisy newcomers who monopolized his mother's attention. The community rallied around them. Ranch wives appeared with casseroles and offers to watch the older boys. The association members helped Jed with heavy work when the twins kept them up all night. It was, Eliza realized, exactly what Jed had envisioned: neighbors becoming family, individual struggles becoming shared strength. Spring brought new challenges. A late blizzard killed several calves, and feed prices soared. But it also brought progress. The association negotiated a contract with the railroad, guaranteeing better prices for their cattle. The range riders had successfully deterred 2 more rustling attempts. The valley was becoming known as a place where law-abiding folks could prosper and thieves had better seek easier targets. One soft May evening, Eliza sat on the porch watching her boys play in the yard. Samuel was teaching Jacob to whistle while the twins dozed in their basket. Inside, she could hear Jed working on the addition that would give them a 3rd bedroom. 4 sons in 4 years. Her body was tired, marked by pregnancy and nursing, work and weather. But her heart was full. The scared widow who'd stood at the altar that snowy day seemed like another person entirely. "Mama, look," Samuel called. He'd managed to get Jacob onto the old gentle mare, was leading him carefully around the yard. "Jake's riding." "Careful," she called back, though she could see how protective Samuel was, one hand steady on his brother's leg. Soon these boys would be old enough to really help with the ranch work. And there would be more brothers to follow. Jed's confidence in his promise had become her own certainty. This land, these children, this life they were building together. It was harder than anything she'd imagined, but also richer. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside, one of the twins began to fuss, and she rose to tend him. There was supper to cook, children to bathe, a husband to feed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was talk of organizing a school for the growing number of ranch children, and the association wanted to establish a permanent headquarters in town. But for now, she had this: the laughter of her boys, the security of community, the promise of more sons to come. The giant Cowboy's vow was becoming reality. 1 child, 1 season, 1 small victory at a time. The summer of 1892 arrived with unusual heat, turning the grasslands brown by July. Eliza moved slowly through her days, her 5th pregnancy weighing heavy in the oppressive weather. Samuel, now 5, had taken charge of his younger brothers with the seriousness of a child given real responsibility. He helped 4-year-old Jacob watch the twins while Eliza struggled with morning sickness that lasted all day. "Mama's sick again," Caleb announced one morning, finding her bent over the wash basin on the porch. "Mama's growing us another brother," Samuel corrected importantly. He'd figured out the pattern. Sickness meant babies. "Right. Mama?" She managed a weak smile, wiping her mouth. "That's right, sweet one. Now take your brothers to play by the creek. Stay where I can see you." The heat made everything harder. The garden withered despite constant watering. The chickens stopped laying. Even the usually placid milk cows grew irritable. Jed worked from before dawn until after dusk, hauling water, moving cattle to what little shade existed, trying to keep their stock alive. It was during this miserable stretch that Benjamin decided to arrive. 2 weeks early, in the middle of a thunderstorm that brought no rain, only lightning and hot wind. Eliza's water broke while she was serving supper, soaking through her dress onto the kitchen floor. "Papa," Samuel's eyes went wide. "Mama's—" "I see," Jed said calmly, though his knuckles were white as he gripped his fork. "Sam, you're in charge of your brothers. Take them to the Holbrook's place. Tell Mrs. Sarah the baby's coming." The boys scattered to gather overnight things, trained by previous emergencies. Within minutes, Jed had them loaded in the wagon, Jacob clutching the twins while Samuel held the reins like a proper little teamster. This labor was different, wrong somehow. The pains came too fast, too sharp, with no rhythm or building. Eliza paced the bedroom, stopping to grip the bedpost when contraction seized her. "Something's not right," she gasped to Jed. "It feels, oh God." Martha arrived to find Eliza on her knees, a puddle of blood spreading beneath her. The midwife's usual calm cracked for just a moment before she took charge. "A baby's turned wrong," she said after a quick examination. "Jed, I need hot water, all the clean linens you have, and my bag from the wagon, now." What followed were the worst hours of Eliza's life. The baby was stuck, one shoulder wedged against her pelvis. Martha's attempts to turn him brought screams that echoed across the ranch. More blood. Too much blood. "I might have to," Martha began, then stopped. They all knew what she meant. Choose between mother and child. Cut the baby out and likely lose Eliza, or— "No," Eliza gasped. "Save him, promise me. Save my boy." "Hush now," Martha said firmly. "Nobody's dying on my watch. Jed, hold her shoulders. This is going to hurt something fierce." With Jed bracing her, Martha managed to work her hand inside, grasping the baby's arm. The pain was beyond description, white-hot, tearing. Eliza heard someone screaming and realized it was her. Then suddenly, release. Benjamin slipped free in a rush of blood and fluid, blue and silent. Martha worked over him frantically while Eliza hemorrhaged onto the bed. "He breathed, damn you," Martha muttered, rubbing the baby roughly. "Come on, boy." A thin wail pierced the air. Benjamin drew his first shuddering breath just as Eliza began to fade, the edges of her vision going dark. "Stay with me." Jed's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Don't you dare leave me. Eliza May, you promised me 10 sons. She wanted to tell him promises didn't matter if she bled to death, but the words wouldn't come. Martha packed her with cloth after cloth, trying to stem the flow. Sarah appeared at some point, Eliza never knew when, adding her hands to the effort. Dawn was breaking when the bleeding finally slowed. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of terrible weakness and Jed's hand gripping hers. Benjamin lay in the cradle, making small mewling sounds that proved he lived. "She needs rest," Martha told Jed quietly. "Weeks of it. No lifting, no work, nothing. And—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This baby needs to be the last for a while. Her body won't survive another pregnancy soon." Through her haze, Eliza felt Jed's hand tighten on hers. "The promise. 10 sons in 13 winters. They were only at 5, not even halfway. Recovery was slow and frustrating. For the first time since her marriage, Eliza couldn't rise to meet the day's demands. Sarah Holbrook essentially moved in, managing the household and the boys while Eliza lay weak as a kitten, barely able to nurse Benjamin. The baby himself struggled, smaller than his brothers. He had trouble latching, trouble breathing when he ate too fast. Many nights Eliza dozed upright in the rocking chair, keeping him elevated so he wouldn't choke. "He's strong," Jed would say, watching his newest son with worried eyes. "He'll grow out of it." But by September, when Eliza could finally walk to the porch without dizzy spells, Benjamin remained fragile. Every cold went to his chest. Every meal was a battle. Martha visited weekly, teaching Eliza tricks to help him eat, herbs to ease his breathing. It was during one of these visits that Eliza felt the familiar flutter in her belly. She froze, hand going to her stomach. No, it was too soon. Her body hadn't healed. Martha had warned. "What is it?" Martha asked, sharp eyes missing nothing. "I think—" Eliza couldn't finish. Terror closed her throat. Martha's examination was brief but thorough. "About 2 months along, I'd say." Her weathered face was grave. "This is dangerous. Eliza, your body—" "I know." The words came out harsh. "But it's done now, isn't it?" That evening, she told Jed. He received the news in silence, jaw working the way it did when he was processing difficult things. "Martha says it's dangerous," Eliza continued, "that we might lose." "We won't." His voice was flat, final. "I won't let that happen. You can't control everything. Jed, sometimes bodies just—" He pulled her against him suddenly, his large frame trembling slightly. "I shouldn't have pushed for this. 10 sons, it was prideful, foolish. If something happens to you because of my promise—" "Stop." She pulled back to look at him. "We both wanted this family, and the promise was just words. What we're building is real." But as autumn progressed, fear shadowed their days. Eliza bled twice, spending days in bed each time. Benjamin caught croup in October, his breathing so labored they took turns sitting up with him, ready to turn him upside down if he stopped breathing entirely. The other boys felt the tension. Samuel grew even more serious, taking on tasks too big for his years. Jacob's mischief turned destructive, breaking eggs, letting the chickens out, anything for attention. The twins clung to each other, reverting to baby talk. November brought the Cattlemen's Association meeting to their ranch. 20 men gathered in the main room, discussing prices and plans for the coming year. Eliza served coffee and cake, moving carefully, her pregnancy now obvious despite her attempts to hide it. "Mrs. Brangan," Dan Morrison said kindly, "you should be resting. Let the menfolk handle our own refreshments." "Moving helps," she replied, though it was a lie. Everything hurt, her back, her legs, the constant pull of scar tissue from Benjamin's birth. Later, cleaning up. She felt it, a gush of warmth, then cramping that doubled her over. She gripped the table, breathing through it, willing it to stop. Not here. Not with a house full of men who looked to Jed for leadership. But her body had its own timeline. By evening, she was in labor, 2 months early. Martha came quickly, her face grim when she saw how fast things were progressing. "Oh, too early?" she muttered. "Baby won't be ready." David arrived just after midnight, tiny and perfect and still. Martha tried everything, rubbing, breathing into his miniature lungs, even plunging him into cold water. Nothing. Eliza held her 6th son as his body cooled, memorizing his features. He had Jed's nose, her chin. Perfect fingernails no bigger than seeds. he would have been beautiful. They buried him 3 days later in the small cemetery on the hill. Jed carved the marker himself. David Brangan, beloved son. November 1892. The boys stood solemn in their best clothes, not fully understanding but knowing something precious had been lost. That night, Eliza couldn't stop crying. Months of fear and pain poured out while Jed held her. No more, she sobbed. I can't do this anymore. Your promise... Damn the promise, he said roughly. You're what matters. You and the boys we have. But even through grief, Eliza knew the truth. The promise had become part of who they were, woven into the fabric of their marriage. 10 sons and 13 winters. They had 7 years left and 5 sons to go. If her body could manage it, if her heart could stand losing another, if their luck held and their community stood strong, Benjamin chose that moment to cry, his weak lungs producing only a whisper of sound. Eliza pulled away from Jed, wiping her face. I'll go, he offered. No. She stood slowly, everything aching. He needs to nurse, and I need to hold a living child right now. As she settled in the rocking chair with Benjamin, she looked out at the November night. Somewhere on that dark hillside lay their 6th son, forever tiny, forever still. But here in her arms was their 5th, fighting for every breath but alive. The promise would wait. For now, survival was enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 1894, delivered by a man in a city suit who looked distinctly out of place against the muddy ranch yard. Eliza watched from the kitchen window as Jed read it, his expression growing darker with each line. Bad news? She asked when he came inside, though his face had already given her the answer. He handed her the letter wordlessly. The letterhead was impressive. Morrison, Whitfield and Associates, Mining Consolidated. The content was less so. Their land, it seemed, sat atop what surveys suggested was a significant silver deposit. The company was prepared to make a generous offer of $5,000 for the ranch. $5,000. Eliza set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode. That's less than half what the land's worth for ranching alone. Jed finished. Never mind what we've built here. Samuel, now 7 and sharp as a tack, looked up from his slate where he'd been practicing letters. We're not selling, are we? Papa? No, son, we're not. But as the weeks passed, it became clear the mining company wasn't accustomed to hearing no. More letters arrived, each more insistent. Then came friendly visits from company representatives who pointed out how isolated the ranch was, how vulnerable to accidents or misfortune, who veiled threats, Tom Garrett said during an association meeting. Same things happening to the Hendersons and the Swensons. Anywhere they think there might be silver. It was Dan Morrison who remembered that Jed had worked in mining before turning to ranching. You know their tricks, don't you? The surveys, the claims, all of it? Jed nodded slowly. Spent 5 years in the Colorado silver mines before I'd saved enough for this place. Engineering, mostly. Survey work. He paused. I left for a reason. Saw what mining does to the land, to the people. But you could read their reports? Tell if they're legitimate? Maybe, if I could get my hands on them. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Another suited man arrived, this time with a leather portfolio full of official-looking documents. While he spread them on the kitchen table, pontificating about mineral rights and government surveys. Eliza kept his coffee cup full and Jed studied every paper within reach. The Homestead Act gives us surface rights, the man explained condescendingly. But mineral rights are a complex matter. If silver is found, the government can reclaim the land for the public good. That's not what the law says, Jed said quietly. I've read it. Homesteaders who've proved up their claims have full rights unless they specifically sold them off, which we haven't. The man's friendly demeanor slipped. Laws can be interpreted many ways, Mr. Brangan, and fighting a company our size in court. Well, that could take years, cost more than you'll see in a lifetime. After he left, Jed spread out the papers he'd memorized. Their surveys are falsified, he said. I recognize the formation descriptions. They're from the Comstock lode, not from here. They're betting we don't know enough to challenge them. But you do. I do. His jaw set in that familiar stubborn line. Question is, will knowing be enough? The answer came at 3 a.m, 2 weeks later. Eliza woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the orange glow of fire through the window. The barn was ablaze. Get the boys, Jed shouted, already pulling on his boots. Get them out of the house. Eliza flew to the children's room, gathering Benjamin while Samuel helped herd his younger brothers. Outside, the night was chaos. Horses screaming, cattle bellowing, the roar of flames eating through hay and timber. Neighbors appeared as if by magic. Tom Garrett, Dan Morrison, the Holbrook men. They formed a bucket brigade, but it was hopeless. The barn was fully engulfed, taking with it their winter hay supply, tools, and tack. It wasn't until dawn, surveying the smoking ruins, that they found the message. Painted on the side of the chicken coop in red letters, "Sell or burn." "Papa?" Jacob's voice was small. "Did bad men do this?" Jed knelt down to his son's level. "Yes, son. Bad men who think they can scare us off our land. But they can't, right?" "No," Jed said firmly. "They can't." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, neighbors had donated hay, tools, and labor. A barn raising was scheduled for the following week. The women organized meals and child care. The association voted to hire guards for the most vulnerable ranches. But the mining company had deeper pockets than the ranchers. The harassment continued. Cut fences, poisoned water holes, cattle found shot. The sheriff, when he bothered to come out from town, shrugged and said there was no proof of who was responsible. It was Reverend Phillips who suggested a different approach. "You can't fight money with guns," he said during a special meeting at the church. "But you can fight it with law and public opinion." "Jed, you said their surveys are false? Completely fabricated? Then we need to prove it, publicly. Make such a noise that even their bought judges can't ignore it." The plan that emerged was audacious. Jed would conduct his own survey, using his mining expertise to map the actual geology of the area. The association would fund it, and they'd publish the results in newspapers from Cheyenne to Denver. Meanwhile, the women would write letters to churches and women's groups back east, highlighting the plight of honest homesteaders against corporate greed. Eliza threw herself into the letter-writing campaign while managing the ranch and raising 5 boys. She was pregnant again, a surprise after the doctor had said it might not be possible following David's loss. This pregnancy felt different, though. Stronger. The baby moved constantly, as if eager to join the chaos of the Brangan household. "Another fighter?" Martha Wilson said during a checkup. "This one's got opinions already." Jed spent his days surveying, often accompanied by Samuel, who held the measuring chains and learned to read rock formations. In the evenings, he translated his findings into reports, using skills he'd thought left behind in Colorado. The mining company escalated their tactics. More fires. The Hendersons lost their house, barely escaping with their lives. The Swensons' well was dynamited. 3 masked men attacked Tom Garrett on the road, leaving him bloodied with a warning for Jed. "Stop the survey or your family's next." That night, Eliza found Jed sitting at the table, head in his hands. "Maybe we should consider their offer," he said, not looking at her. 5,000 would buy us land somewhere else, somewhere safe. Jedediah Brangan, her voice was sharp enough to cut. "You look at me." He raised his head, and she saw something she'd never seen before, defeat in his eyes. "You promised me 10 sons on this land," she said. "Not some other land. This land, the land you chose, we've built on, we've bled for. Our 6th son is buried on that hillside. You think I'm leaving him for any amount of money?" "Eliza." "No." She was trembling now, with anger more than fear. "Those men think they can drive us off because they have money and connections, but they don't have what we have. This community, these neighbors, this knowledge you're gathering. We're going to fight, and we're going to win because the alternative is letting them destroy everything we've built." He stood slowly, crossing to pull her into his arms. "When did you get so fierce?" "The day I married a giant who makes impossible promises," she replied against his chest. "Now come to bed. Tomorrow you finish that survey, and I finish those letters. And next week, we welcome our 7th son into a home that's still ours." Joshua arrived during the barn raising, as if he couldn't wait to be part of the community effort. While men hammered and sawed outside, Eliza labored inside, Martha attending with her usual competence. He was born just as the final beam was set in place, his lusty cries mixing with the cheers of the workers. "A barn raising and a baby raising on the same day," Martha declared. "That's got to be good luck." Whether it was luck or providence, things began to turn. Jed's completed survey, backed by sworn affidavits from the original government surveyor, proved conclusively that there was no significant silver deposit under Willow Creek Valley. The mining reports were exposed as fraudulent in newspapers across the territory. More importantly, the letters from ranch wives had reached sympathetic ears. Church groups and women's suffrage organizations took up their cause, painting it as honest families against corporate corruption. Political pressure mounted for a real investigation. The breaking point came when the mining company overplayed their hand. They sent 20 armed men to forcibly evict the Swensons. But word had spread, and they were met by 40 ranchers, armed and ready. The sheriff, faced with potential massacre and newspaper reporters who'd been tipped off, suddenly found his backbone and arrested the mining company's men for trespassing. Within a month, Morrison, Whitfield, and Associates quietly withdrew their interest in Willow Creek Valley. The official reason was reassessment of mineral potential. The real reason was that they'd discovered what Jed had always known. Some things were worth more than silver, and some people couldn't be bought or bullied. The night the news came, the whole valley celebrated at the Brangan Ranch. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Children ran wild in the summer twilight, and fiddle music carried on the warm air. Eliza, with Joshua at her breast and her other boys racing around with their friends, felt a deep satisfaction. 7 sons, she murmured to Jed as they watched the celebration. 6 living, 1 watching from heaven. 6 more years for 3 more boys. He wrapped an arm around her, careful of the baby. "Think we'll make it?" She thought of all they'd survived, winters and drought, loss and threats, her body's struggles and their heart's griefs. Then she looked at their sons, at their neighbors who'd become family, at the land they'd fought to keep. "I know we will," she said. "After all, you're not the only one who keeps promises." The courtroom in Cheyenne was packed to capacity on that sweltering August morning in 1896. Eliza sat in the front row, 8 months pregnant with their 8th child, trying to keep 2-year-old Joshua quiet while her older boys fidgeted beside her. Jed stood at the defendant's table, his massive frame somehow diminished by the formal proceedings. The court calls Morrison, Whitfield and Associates versus the homesteaders of Willow Creek Valley to order, the bailiff announced. It had been 2 years since the mining company's retreat, but they'd returned with lawyers instead of gunmen. Unable to steal the land outright, they now claimed prior mineral rights based on an obscure territorial statute from 1871. Your Honor, the company's lawyer, a sharp-faced man from Denver, began. We present documented evidence that mineral surveys were conducted on this land before these homesteaders filed their claims. By territorial law, that gives my clients priority rights to any minerals discovered. Eliza watched Jed's jaw tighten. They'd known this argument was coming, had prepared for it, but hearing it stated so baldly in court was different from planning around the kitchen table. Their lawyer, young William Garrett, Tom's nephew, fresh from law school and working for a fraction of his usual fee, stood to respond. Your Honor, we intend to prove that these so-called surveys were fraudulent, that the dates have been falsified, and that this entire claim is an attempt to circumvent the legal rights of lawful homesteaders. The judge, an elderly man with sharp eyes, nodded. Proceed. What followed was a battle of documents and testimony. The mining company presented survey reports dated 1870, signed by a surveyor who'd conveniently died 5 years ago. William countered with Jed's analysis showing the reports used modern surveying techniques not invented until 1875. I spent 5 years in the Colorado mines, Jed testified, his deep voice filling the courtroom. I know every survey method used in the territories. These reports reference triangulation methods that weren't published until the Hayden Survey of 1877. It's impossible for them to have been written in 1870. The mining company's lawyer tried to shake him on cross-examination, but Jed's expertise was solid. More damaging to their case was the parade of witnesses William had assembled, government clerks who testified that the documents had appeared in territorial files only recently, paper experts who confirmed the ink was too fresh for 26-year-old documents. During a recess, Eliza overheard 2 reporters discussing the case. David versus Goliath, one said, except this time, David's got the giant on his side. The most dramatic moment came when Sarah Holbrook took the stand. William had discovered that she'd worked as a clerk in the territorial office before her marriage, keeping meticulous personal records of all filed documents. I have here, she said, producing a worn ledger, my personal notes from 1870 to 1872. Every mineral survey filed in the territory is recorded. There's no mention of any survey in what's now Willow Creek Valley. The mining company's lawyer objected furiously, but the judge allowed the evidence. Sarah's reputation for honesty was unimpeachable, her records detailed and consistent. During the noon recess, chaos erupted. The mining company, seeing their case crumbling, made one last desperate play. 20 hired men surrounded the courthouse, blocking the ranchers from returning for the afternoon session. Seems your witnesses have been delayed, the company lawyer said smoothly when court reconvened with half-empty benches. Perhaps we should proceed without them. But he'd underestimated the ranch women, led by Eliza, despite her advanced pregnancy. They'd anticipated trouble. While the men were blocked at the front, the women entered through the jail entrance, filling the courtroom just as the judge was considering a postponement. Your Honor, Eliza said, standing despite the bailiff's protests. The defendant's witnesses are being physically prevented from entering this courthouse. I request you send marshals to ensure access to justice. The judge's face darkened. Bailiff, fetch the federal marshals, now. Within minutes, the hired thugs were dispersed and the ranchers filed in, dusty but determined. The mining lawyer's confident smirk had vanished. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Reverend Phillips had spent weeks researching the mining company's principles. He'd discovered that Morrison, the lead partner, had been convicted of claim jumping in California in 1868. A man who stole claims in California, William argued in closing, now attempts to steal them in Wyoming. Your Honor, this case isn't about mineral rights. It's about whether money and influence can override the law that promised land to those willing to work it. The judge retired to consider. The wait was agony, Joshua fussed, and Eliza felt the new baby moving restlessly, as if sensing the tension. Jed sat perfectly still, but she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, he began. This court finds that the mineral surveys presented by Morrison, Whitfield, and Associates are fraudulent fabrications. Moreover, this court finds that the company has engaged in a deliberate conspiracy to defraud lawful homesteaders of their property rights. A cheer went up from the ranchers, quickly silenced by the bailiff. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court recommends that the territorial prosecutor investigate criminal charges against the company's principals. The homesteaders of Willow Creek Valley retain all rights to their land, surface and mineral. Case dismissed with prejudice. The celebration that night filled the Cheyenne Hotel where the ranchers were staying. But Eliza couldn't fully relax. The baby had been restless all day, and now she felt the familiar tightening that meant labor was beginning. Jed, she whispered, gripping his arm. We need to find a doctor. His face went white. Now? But we're 3 days from home. The babies don't wait for convenient timing, she managed through a contraction. The hotel manager's wife, a motherly woman named Mrs. Foster, took charge. She sent her husband for the doctor and bustled Eliza up to their best room. The ranch women followed, Martha Wilson issuing orders like a general. Nathan arrived just after midnight, born in a fancy hotel room instead of the familiar bedroom at home. He was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a cry that could wake the whole floor. Born on the day we saved our land, Jed murmured, cradling his 8th son. That's got to mean something. It means he'll be a fighter, Martha said, like his parents. The journey home was triumphant. Word had spread about both the court victory and Nathan's birth. At every stop, people came out to congratulate them. The baby, passed from arm to arm among the ranch women, seemed to thrive on the attention. But there was no time to rest. The failed lawsuit had cost the mining company credibility and money, but it hadn't removed the threat entirely. At a special meeting of the Cattlemen's Association, the ranchers voted to take a bold step. We incorporate, Tom Garrett proposed, form our own township, elect our own sheriff, our own judges, make it legally impossible for outsiders to manipulate our community. The process was complex, requiring petitions, surveys, and territorial approval. But the recent court case had given them credibility and connections. William Garrett, energized by his victory, volunteered to handle the legal work. Eliza found herself at the center of the women's organizing efforts. Between nursing Nathan and managing her growing boys, she coordinated letter-writing campaigns, hosted planning meetings, and even spoke at the territorial capital. You should see yourself, Jed said one evening, finding her surrounded by papers while simultaneously helping Samuel with arithmetic and settling a dispute between the twins. Like a general commanding an army. An army of 8, she laughed, then winced. Soon to be 9. He stared at her. Already? Spring. I think Nathan's only 4 months old, but she shrugged. Your promise doesn't seem to care about convenient timing. The push for township status gained momentum through the winter. The mining company made one last attempt to block it, claiming the ranchers lacked sufficient population and infrastructure. In response, the community performed an impromptu census, documenting over 200 residents in the valley. They also voted to establish a school, with Sarah Holbrook as the first teacher. Education, she said at the planning meeting, is what will keep our children on this land. Not ignorance and isolation, but knowledge and connection. The school building went up in a single October day, every family contributing labor or materials. Samuel and Jacob helped carry boards while the twins minded Joshua and baby Nathan. Even Benjamin, still small for his 6 years but determined, hauled nails and held tools. Aaron chose to arrive during the township celebration the following spring. The territorial governor himself had come to sign the official papers establishing Brangan Valley Township, named for the family whose fight had inspired its creation. Fitting, Martha said as she placed the newborn in Eliza's arms. This baby's birth certificate will be one of the first official documents of the new township. The celebration lasted 3 days. There were speeches and ceremonies, races and contests, enough food to feed an army. The mining company was notably absent, their interest in the valley finally exhausted after their very public defeat. But for Eliza, the sweetest moment came on the final evening. She sat on the porch of their expanded house, Aaron at her breast, watching her sons play in the yard. Samuel, almost 10 now, was teaching Benjamin to rope. Jacob and the twins were building something complicated out of scraps of wood. Joshua toddled after them, determined to help. Nathan slept in his cradle beside her. 9 sons, Jed said, settling his large frame beside her. 1 more winter left of the 13. 1 more son to complete the promise. She leaned against him, tired but content. We've built more than a family, haven't we? We've built a community, a legacy. We have. He was quiet for a moment. Those mining men, they never understood. They saw only what might be under the ground. We saw what could grow on top of it. As the sun set over Brangan Valley Township, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Eliza closed her eyes and said a prayer of gratitude for the sons they'd been given, for the ones still to come, for the community that had stood together against those who would destroy it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Aaron would need constant feeding. The older boys required schooling and guidance. The ranch demanded endless work. And somewhere, perhaps, their 10th son was already beginning his journey toward life. But tonight, surrounded by family and friends, on land that was truly and legally theirs forever, Eliza allowed herself a moment of perfect peace. The giant cowboy's impossible promise was nearly fulfilled. More importantly, the life they'd built while keeping that promise was more than either of them had dared to dream on that long-ago winter wedding day. The 13th winter arrived with a gentleness that belied its significance. December 1899 painted Brangan Valley in soft whites and pale blues, the harsh blizzards of previous years replaced by steady, quiet snowfall. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, one hand on her swollen belly, watching her 9 sons work alongside their father in the barn. Samuel, nearly 13 himself, had grown tall and broad-shouldered, a younger echo of Jed. He directed his brothers with quiet authority, Jacob and the twins hauling water, Benjamin and Joshua spreading fresh straw, while Nathan and Aaron, at 3 and 2, helped by scattering chicken feed with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "Any day now," Martha Wilson said, finishing her examination. The midwife's hair had gone completely gray in the years since Samuel's birth, but her hands remained steady. "This one's sitting low and ready." Eliza nodded, unsurprised. She'd carried 10 children now, 9 living sons and little David, who rested on the hillside. This pregnancy had been different from the start, easier, somehow, as if her body had finally learned the rhythm of creation. "Jed's already picked the name," she said to Michael, "after his father." Martha smiled. Full circle, then, the promise keeper naming his last son for the man who taught him to keep his word. That evening, the family gathered for supper in the expanded dining room. The table, built by Jed and the older boys, stretched nearly 12 feet to accommodate them all. Conversation flowed like water, Samuel discussing plans for spring planting, Jacob debating the merits of different horse breeds, the twins arguing good-naturedly about everything. "Tell us again about the promise, Papa," Joshua piped up, young enough to still love the family stories. Jed's weathered face softened. "Which promise is that, son?" You know, the one about 10 suns in 13 winters. This is the 13th winter, right? And the baby will be number 10? That's right, Jed confirmed, his eyes finding Eliza's across the table. Though when I made that promise, I didn't know the half of what it meant. "What did it mean?" Benjamin asked, always the thoughtful one despite his lingering frailty. Eliza answered before Jed could. "It meant your father believed in tomorrow when I'd forgotten how. It meant choosing hope over fear. And it meant building something larger than ourselves, this family, this community, this life." As if in response to her words, the first contraction rippled across her belly. She breathed through it, saying nothing. There was time yet. But Michael, like his brothers before him, had his own timeline. By the time the boys were in bed, the pains were regular and strong. Jed sent Samuel on horseback to fetch Martha while he helped Eliza to their bedroom. 13 years, she said between contractions. Seems like yesterday and forever ago all at once. You were so young, Jed murmured, holding her hand. That scared widow in her gray dress, I thought you might faint when I made that promise. I thought you were mad. She squeezed his fingers as another wave hit. 10 sons, who says such things at their wedding? A man who sees what others miss, he replied. I saw your strength that day, even if you didn't. Saw the mother you'd become, the partner you'd be. I just gave it numbers and a timeline. Martha arrived with the efficiency of long practice, bringing Sarah Holbrook as assistant. The house filled with quiet activity, water heating, linens prepared. The older boys shepherded back to bed when they tried to investigate. This labor was different from the others. Calmer, somehow. Between contractions, Eliza could hear her sons, Samuel reading to the younger ones, Jacob making them laugh with silly voices. The continuity of it, the rightness, filled her with deep satisfaction. Nearly there, Martha announced near midnight. This baby knows what he's about. Michael entered the world just as the clock struck 12, ushering in not just a new day but a new century. December 20th, 1899 became December 20th, 1899 in the space between one breath and the next. A century baby, Sarah breathed. Born at the exact moment, that's got to be special. He was perfect, not the largest of her babies nor the smallest. He cried once, lusty and clear, then settled against Eliza's breast with a contented sigh, as if to say his waiting was over at last. 10 sons, Jed whispered, touching Michael's downy head with one massive finger. We did it, Eliza May. 13 winters, 10 sons. 9 sons, she corrected gently, and 1 angel watching over them. But yes, my love, we did it. Word spread quickly through the valley. By morning, despite the snow, neighbors began arriving. They brought food and gifts, but mostly they came to witness the completion of something that had become legend in their community. The giant cowboy's impossible promise. Fulfilled. Reverend Phillips, hair now snow white, offered a special blessing. This family, he said, has shown us all what faith and determination can build. Not just sons, but a community. Not just a promise, but a legacy. The photographer from town arrived in the afternoon, setting up his equipment in the main room. "A historic moment," he declared. "The Brangan family at the turn of the century. This photograph will be treasured for generations." They arranged themselves carefully, Jed seated in his big chair with Eliza beside him, Michael in her arms. The boys ranged around them by age, Samuel standing tall behind his father, Aaron fidgeting on his mother's other side. Even Benjamin, though tired from the excitement, stood straight and proud. "He hold very still," the photographer instructed, ducking under his black cloth. The flash exploded, capturing forever the moment of completion. 10 sons, 2 parents, 1 family forged by a promise and tempered by trials. As the celebrations continued, Eliza found herself slipping away to the quiet of her bedroom. She needed to nurse Michael, yes, but also to think, to absorb the magnitude of this moment. 13 years, 10 pregnancies, 9 living sons, countless challenges, blizzards and drought, rustlers and mining companies, financial struggles and physical pain. They'd built not just a family, but a cornerstone of the community. The Brangan Ranch had grown from 160 acres to over 1,000. The valley had transformed from scattered homesteads to an incorporated township with a school, a church, and a future. "Mama?" Samuel peered around the door. "May I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart." He sat carefully on the bed's edge, studying his newest brother. "I remember when Benjamin was born," he said. "I thought he was so small. Michael's bigger, isn't he? Each of you came in your own time, in your own way." Eliza said, "Just as each of you will find your own path as you grow." "Will we all stay here on the ranch?" It was a question she'd wondered herself. 10 sons meant 10 futures, 10 sets of dreams that might lead in different directions. "Some will stay, some may go," she answered honestly. "But this will always be home. This land, this family, it's your foundation. What you build on it is up to you." Over the following days, as Eliza recovered and Michael settled into the rhythm of the household, she watched her sons with new eyes. Samuel, already showing signs of his father's leadership. Jacob with his gift for animals. The twins, so different yet inseparable, one drawn to books and one to building. Benjamin, fragile still but with an artist's eye. Joshua the peacemaker, Nathan the adventurer, Aaron the charmer, and now Michael, still becoming. The photography studio sent word that the family portrait was ready. When Jed brought it home, they gathered to see. There they were, frozen in time, the giant cowboy and his bride, surrounded by the 10 sons he'd promised her. But the image showed more than just faces. It captured something indefinable: strength, unity, hope made manifest. "We should hang it in the main room," Jacob suggested, "where everyone can see." "No," Eliza said softly. "In the hallway, where we'll pass it every day, where your children and grandchildren will see it and know that impossible promises can come true, with enough faith and work and love." That evening, as snow began to fall again, the family gathered in the main room. The older boys were teaching the younger ones to play checkers. Jed was sketching plans for a new barn. Michael slept in his cradle, peaceful and content. Eliza picked up her mending, but her hands stilled as she looked around the room. This was what the promise had built, not just 10 sons, but 10 unique souls who would carry forward what she and Jed had begun. They would face their own challenges, make their own promises, build their own futures. But they would do it grounded in the values this land and this family had taught them. "What are you thinking?" Jed asked, noticing her stillness. "That promises are just the beginning," she said. "It's what grows from them that matters." He reached over, covering her hand with his. Then we've grown something good. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Brangan Valley in pristine white. A new century had begun, bringing changes they couldn't imagine. But inside the sturdy house, warmed by fire and filled with love, the giant cowboy and his bride sat surrounded by their 10 sons, their impossible promise complete. Their real work, raising these boys to be good men, still ongoing. The photograph would yellow with age. The boys would grow and scatter and return. The ranch would prosper and struggle and endure. But this moment, this perfect moment of completion and continuation, would remain. A testament to the power of keeping one's word and building a life worth living. 10 sons in 13 winters. Promise made, promise kept, legacy begun.